My sister-in-law lived rent-free with us, yet complained my newborn's crying ruined her sleep. When her parents demanded, I send my baby to daycare to accommodate her, I smiled. Then, I executed a ruthless eviction plan that exposed their entitlement and left them absolutely nowhere to go. This story gets incredibly messy before it gets better, so make sure you're subscribed to see how justice is served. I'm curious, has anyone else dealt with entitled house guests like this? Let me know in the comments. The exhaustion of the fourth trimester is a physical weight, something heavy and wet that clings to your bones and refuses to let go. It wasn't just being tired. It was a bone-deep depletion that made the air feel thick and the lights feel too bright. My daughter, barely 8 weeks old, was currently in a cluster-feeding phase that felt less like nourishment and more like a marathon of endurance. I hadn't slept for more than 90 minutes at a stretch in 3 days. My hair was thrown up in a messy bun that hadn't been retied in 24 hours, and my shirt had a suspicious stain on the shoulder that I didn't have the energy to investigate. I was sitting on the edge of the living room sofa, staring blankly at the wall, rocking my daughter, Lily, who had finally, mercifully, drifted into a shallow sleep. The house was quiet, a rare commodity. The silence felt fragile, like thin glass that could shatter if I breathed too loudly. I was sipping a cup of lukewarm tea, trying to summon the energy to stand up and walk to the kitchen, when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. The noise was like a gunshot in the sanctuary of the living room. I flinched, my heart hammering against my ribs, and quickly placed a hand over Lily's ear to dampen the sound. She stirred, letting out a small, bird-like whimper, but didn't wake. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding and reached for the phone. It was a text from my mother-in-law, Diane. Usually, Diane's texts were benign, gifs of cats, questions about how Jackson was doing at work, or requests for photos of the baby. But as I unlocked the screen, the wall of text that greeted me made my stomach drop. It wasn't a casual check-in. It was a manifesto. KH Lo, we need to talk about the living situation. Caleb and I have been on the phone with Anna all morning. She is in tears. She says the baby is crying constantly, and she cannot focus on her studies or get any rest. She is failing her quizzes because she is exhausted. We think it is best if you put the baby in daycare during the day so Anna can get the sleep she needs. We can't have her failing out of college because your house is too loud. Please look into centers this week. I read the message once, then I read it again. The words swam before my blurry, sleep-deprived eyes. I felt a physical sensation of cold wash over me, starting at my scalp and rushing down to my toes. It was a visceral reaction, a mix of shock and nausea. I looked down at my daughter, her tiny eyelashes resting against her pale cheeks. She was 8 weeks old. She was an infant who relied on me for everything, whose only way of communicating pain, hunger, or fear was to cry. And Diane, my mother-in-law, a woman who had raised 3 children herself, was suggesting that I remove my newborn from her home, from her mother, and pay a stranger to watch her, not because I had to work, but because her 19-year-old daughter needed to sleep in. The audacity was so immense it felt suffocating. I looked around my living room, the house I had bought before I even met Jackson, the mortgage I paid every month. I thought about Anna, sleeping soundly in the guest room upstairs at 1:00 p.m. on a Tuesday, while I tiptoed around my own home. My hands started to shake, not from fear, but from a sudden, white-hot rage that burned through the exhaustion fog. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, unadulterated fury. I had opened my home to family, and in return, they were trying to evict my baby. I gripped the phone tight enough to turn my knuckles white. The betrayal was worse than the exhaustion. It was a poison that clarified everything in a single heartbeat. For a long time, I just sat there, frozen in the dim light of the living room. The text message remained open on my screen, glowing like a toxic ember. The silence of the house, which I had cherished just moments ago, now felt oppressive. It was the silence of a house held hostage. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. But what I was listening for What I suddenly became hyper-aware of was the silence from upstairs, specifically from the guest suite at the end of the hall. Anna was up there. I knew she was there because her car was in the driveway, blocking me in, as it usually was. I knew she was there because I had heard her stomping around at 3:00 a.m., aching a smoothie in the kitchen while I was trying to nurse Lily back to sleep in the nursery. She had dropped the blender lid, a clatter that sounded like cymbals crashing in the dead of night, and I had winced, praying Lily wouldn't startle. Now it was early afternoon, and Anna was likely sound asleep. Resting, catching up on the precious sleep my infant daughter was apparently stealing from her. I stood up slowly, cradling Lily against my chest, and walked into the kitchen. My movements felt mechanical, robotic. I needed to process this. I needed to understand the architecture of this attack before I responded. This wasn't just a rude suggestion. It was a coordinated strike. Anna hadn't come to me. She hadn't knocked on my door and said, "Hey KH I'm struggling with the noise. Can we buy a white noise machine?" Or, "Is there a quiet time we can agree on?" No. She had gone straight to management. She had called her parents, cried to them, painted herself as the victim of a colicky baby, and weaponized their parental protective instincts against me. I heard the garage door rumble open. Jackson was home early. Usually, the sound of his arrival was the best part of my day. It meant reinforcements. It meant I could hand Lily over for 20 minutes and take a hot shower. But today, the sound of the garage door made my stomach twist. Did he know? Was he part of this conversation? Jackson walked in through the mudroom, looking tired but smiling. He dropped his keys in the bowl and loosened his tie. "Hey," he whispered, seeing Lily asleep in my arms. "How was the day? Did you survive?" He came over to kiss my forehead, but I pulled back slightly. The motion was involuntary, a flinch born of suspicion. He paused, his smile fading. "KH Lo, what's wrong?" I didn't trust my voice to remain steady, so I simply held out my phone. "Read this." Jackson took the phone, his brow furrowing. I watched his eyes scan the text. I watched his expression shift from confusion to disbelief, and then to a sort of pained grimace. He let out a long sigh and rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous tic he had when he was avoiding conflict. "Mom is being dramatic," he said, handing the phone back to me. "You know how she gets. Anna probably just complained a little and Mom went into protective overdrive." "Protective overdrive?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Jackson, she just suggested we put our 2-month-old daughter in daycare so your sister can sleep. In my house. The house where she pays 0 rent. The house where I do her laundry and cook her dinner." Jackson winced. I know, it's ridiculous. I'll talk to them. I'll tell them it's not happening." "It's not just not happening," I hissed, trying to keep my voice down so I didn't wake the baby. "It's insulting. It's a violation. Anna is upstairs right now, probably sleeping until noon while I'm walking on eggshells. And she has the gall to call your parents and say we are the problem." Jackson reached for my arm, trying to soothe me. "KH Lo, she's 19, she's a kid. She doesn't understand what having a baby is like. She's stressed about school. Look, I'll tell Mom to back off. We just need to keep the peace until the semester ends. It's only a few more months." Keep the peace. That phrase hung in the air between us. It was the mantra of his family. Keep the peace meant let Diane steamroll you. Keep the peace meant let Anna do whatever she wanted, because she was the baby of the family. Keep the peace meant I had to absorb the disrespect, so Jackson didn't have to have an uncomfortable conversation. I looked at my husband, a good man who was currently failing to see the precipice we were standing on. He thought this was just a misunderstanding, a minor family squabble that could be smoothed over with a polite phone call. He didn't see that a line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. "I'm going to take a nap," I said coldly, turning away from him. Since apparently I'm the only one in this house who isn't allowed to sleep. As I walked up the stairs, leaving Jackson standing in the kitchen, I felt a shift inside me. The sadness was evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They thought I was trapped. They thought I was just Jackson's wife, the tired new mom who would roll over and do whatever the matriarch demanded to keep the peace. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten that this house wasn't community property. My name was on the deed. My signature was on the mortgage. And while I had been generous, my generosity had an expiration date that they had just aggressively fast-forwarded. To understand why this text message was the nuclear option, you have to understand how Anna ended up in my guest room in the first place. It wasn't an accident, it was a rescue mission. Or so I thought. 6 months ago, when I was 7 months pregnant and nesting with a frenzy that bordered on clinical insanity, Cal, B and Diane had come over for dinner. Over roasted chicken and vegetables, they had sighed heavily and launched into the Anna problem. Anna had been accepted to a college about 30 minutes from our house. It was a decent school, but the dorms were expensive, and Caleb had made some bad investments the year prior that had tightened their finances. They were worried about her taking out massive loans. They were worried about her living with strangers. They were worried she wouldn't eat right. I, in my hormone-fueled state of benevolence, had looked at Jackson, seen the worry in his eyes for his little sister, and made the offer. "She can stay with us," I had said. I remember the words leaving my mouth and the immediate relief on Diane's face. "We have the guest suite. It has its own bathroom. She can save money, focus on school, and be close to family." I had imagined a scenario straight out of a sitcom. Anna would be the doting aunt. She would help hold the baby while I showered. We would have coffee together in the mornings before she went to class. I thought I was gaining a village. Instead, I had invited a parasite. Anna moved in a month before Lily was born. The signs were there immediately, but I ignored them. She arrived with 3 carloads of stuff, filling the guest room and spilling into the hallway. She didn't offer to help move anything in. She sat on the couch texting while Jackson and I, 7 months pregnant, lugged boxes upstairs. "I have a bad back," she had said vaguely when Jackson asked her to grab a lamp. Within a week, the dynamic was established. Anna was not a roommate, she was a hotel guest. She left her dishes in the sink, crusted with oatmeal and ketchup. She left her wet towels on the bathroom floor. She parked her car directly in the middle of the driveway, making it impossible for me or Jackson to leave without asking her to move it. A request she always met with a heavy, dramatic sigh, as if we were asking her to donate a kidney. When I was in labor, we had to bang on her door for 10 minutes to get her to move her car so we could go to the hospital. She came to the door in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes, and said, "Can't you just take an Uber?" That should have been the end of it, but I was focused on Lily. I was focused on becoming a mother. I let it slide. Now, looking back, I realized that Anna wasn't just lazy, she was fundamentally entitled. She was studying communications with a minor in general studies, a curriculum that seemed to consist primarily of making TikToks in her room and sleeping until 1:00 p.m. She didn't have a job. She didn't contribute to groceries. She didn't clean. And the antagonist of this story wasn't just Anna. It was the shadowy figure of the student. Diane and Caleb had created a mythology around Anna. She was fragile. She was brilliant but easily overwhelmed. Her studies were paramount, a sacred duty that required the entire family to tiptoe around her. If Anna failed a test, it wasn't because she stayed up until 4:00 a.m. gaming or chatting online. It was because the environment wasn't supportive enough. Anna had weaponized this. She knew that if she complained to me, I would tell her to buy earplugs. But if she complained to Diane, Diane would invoke the sanctity of the education. I sat in the nursery, rocking Lily, thinking about the woman who was currently occupying the room next door. I thought about the professional way she dressed when she actually went to class, preppy, polished, looking every bit the diligent scholar. I thought about how she smiled sweetly at Jackson when he came home and asked how her day was, lying through her teeth about how hard she was working. She was a con artist, a 19-year-old con artist who had correctly identified that her parents were easy marks, and was now testing to see if I was one too. She had made a calculation. She had bet that I would value my relationship with my in-laws more than my own comfort. She had bet that I was too polite, too desperate to be the good daughter-in-law, to fight back. She had bet wrong. I looked down at Lily, who was finally peaceful, her little chest rising and falling. I wasn't just fighting for me anymore. I was fighting for her. And in that quiet nursery, with the afternoon sun filtering through the blinds, the exhaustion finally broke, revealing the sharp, clear landscape of the battlefield. I picked up my phone again. I didn't reply to Diane. Not yet. Instead, I opened my banking app. I opened the folder on my phone labeled House Documents. And then, I opened a browser window and searched for something I never thought I'd need to look up for a family member. Tenancy at will eviction, notice template state of my state. The page loaded. I smiled, a grim, humorless curve of my lips. The transition from victim to strategist didn't happen in a flash of lightning. It happened in the slow, grinding friction of the next 2 hours. I didn't back downstairs to argue with Jackson. I didn't throw my phone across the room. Instead, I sat in the nursery rocking chair, Lily asleep on my chest, and I let the silence of the room sharpen my mind. I realized that for the last 2 months, perhaps even the last 6, I had been playing a role that wasn't natural to me. I had been playing the accommodating wife, the gracious hostess, the woman who bends herself into pretzels to ensure everyone else is comfortable while her own needs are ground into dust. I had done it because I loved Jackson, and by extension, I wanted to love his family. I wanted to be the daughter-in-law Diane bragged about, not the one she complained about. But that text message had shattered the illusion. There was no amount of bending I could do that would satisfy them. They didn't want accommodation, they wanted submission. They wanted me to prioritize Anna's comfort over my child's existence. I looked down at Lily. She let out a soft sigh, her tiny hand gripping my shirt. They want to send you away, I thought, the absurdity of it fueling a cold, hard fire in my gut. They want me to pay $2,000 a month to a daycare center so a 19-year-old can sleep until noon in a house she doesn't own. The sadness evaporated. The exhaustion, while still physically present, was pushed into the background by a surge of adrenaline. I carefully placed Lily in her crib, turning on the monitor. Then I went into my home office, a room I hadn't used for work in weeks, and sat at my desk. I opened my laptop. My first stop wasn't a parenting forum or a venting text to my best friend. It was the county assessor's website. I pulled up the deed to our house. There it was, in black and white, K.H. Lowe Miller. I had bought this place 3 years before I married Jackson. While we treated it as our marital home and Jackson contributed to the bills, the legal reality was a fortress I had built for myself. I had invited Anna in as a guest at will. I opened a blank document. I didn't start typing immediately. I sat there, listening to the house. I could hear Anna upstairs. She was awake now. I heard the distinct thud-thud of her walking to the bathroom, followed by the rush of the shower. It was 2:30 p.m. Her first class on Tuesdays was supposedly at 8:00 a.m. I narrowed my eyes. She is failing her quizzes because she is exhausted. If she was exhausted, why was she awake until 3:00 a.m. every night? And if she was failing, was it really because of a baby who cried occasionally, or was it because she was treating college like a prolonged slumber party? I needed leverage. I had the legal right to kick her out, yes, but doing so without a bulletproof reason would make me the villain in Jackson's eyes. He would see it as me declaring war on his family. I needed to frame this differently. I needed to use their own weapon against them. They had handed me the premise. The environment in this house is causing Anna to fail. I typed a header, notice to vacate. But then I paused. A legal notice was too cold, too aggressive for the first step. It would put Jackson on the defensive immediately. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be the concerned sister-in-law. I closed the document and opened a spreadsheet instead. I began to log data. I went back through my mental calendar of the last month. Monday, Anna slept until 11 a.m., missed bio lab, claimed the professor canceled it. Tuesday, Anna home all day, claimed study day, spent 4 hours on FaceTime with boyfriend. Wednesday, left at 4 p.m. for a night class, returned at 2 a.m. smelling like cheap beer. The pattern was obvious to me, but I had never written it down. I had never presented it to Jackson because I didn't want to be the nag. But now I was building a case file. I stood up and walked to the window. I needed to verify something. I remembered Diane mentioning that they paid Anna's tuition directly to the school because Anna is still learning to budget. That meant Anna didn't see the bills, but it also meant someone was receiving the grade reports. I knew Anna used our printer. It was in the hallway, connected to the home network. She often printed essays and syllabi. I walked out into the hallway. The printer sat on a small console table. I pressed the history button on the small LCD screen. Print job, Psych 101 essay final docx, 3 pages yesterday. Print job, return label Zara. PDF 1 page yesterday. Print job, academic warning. PDF 1 page 3 days ago. My breath hitched, academic warning, PDF. She hadn't just complained about the baby. She was already in trouble. She had printed the warning letter 3 days ago. That was likely the catalyst. She got the warning, panicked, realized she needed a scapegoat, and decided to blame the newborn. I couldn't reprint the document from the history. The memory didn't work like that, but I knew it existed. And I knew where she would have put it. Anna was messy, but she was paranoid. She wouldn't throw a document like that in the kitchen trash. She would keep it in her room or in the recycling bin in the garage, buried under soda cans. I went downstairs. Jackson was on the couch, watching a game with the volume low. He looked up, his face guarded. "Hey," he said tentatively, "feeling better?" "Much," I lied. I kept my voice eerily calm. "I've been thinking about what your mom said, about Anna failing, about the baby crying." Jackson sighed, rubbing his temples. "KH Low, look, I'm going to call Mom tonight. I'll tell her daycare isn't happening. We don't need to make this a whole thing." "No, Jackson," I said, sitting on the armchair opposite him. I crossed my legs and looked him dead in the eye. "Your mother is right." Jackson blinked, stunned. What? "She's right," I repeated. "We can't have Anna failing out of college. That would be a tragedy. And if our house is the reason she's failing, if Lily is truly so disruptive that Anna can't function, then we have a moral obligation to fix the environment." Jackson looked skeptical but relieved. "So, what? You want to look at daycares?" "No," I said softly. "I want to help Anna succeed. And I realized that as long as she lives here, she's going to fail. The baby isn't going anywhere, Jackson. Lily lives here. This is her home. But Anna has other options. If this house is a hostile study environment, then the only loving thing to do is to remove her from the hostile environment." Jackson stared at me. He saw the logic, but he also saw the trap. "You want to kick her out." "I want to save her education," I corrected him, my voice dripping with faux concern. "Your parents said she is failing. They said she needs sleep. Since I cannot stop a 2-month-old from being a baby, the only variable we can control is Anna's location. It's for her own good." Jackson opened his mouth to argue, but stopped. He was trapped. If he argued to keep her, he was admitting that the baby wasn't the problem, which meant his mother was lying. If he agreed with his mother that the baby was the problem, then Anna had to leave for her own sanity. I see your point," he stammered. "Good," I said, standing up. "I'm going to call your parents. I want to tell them the good news myself. We found a solution." I waited until 6:00 p.m. I knew this was when Caleb and Diane would be sitting down to dinner. They were creatures of habit. They would be expecting a call from Jackson, groveling, perhaps offering a compromise like, "We'll keep the baby quiet in the mornings." They were not expecting me. I sat at the kitchen island, my phone in front of me on speaker. Jackson stood by the refrigerator, looking like a man marching to the gallows. He was nervous, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Just be nice, he whispered. I'm going to be incredibly helpful, I replied. I dialed. It rang twice before Diane picked up. Hello, her voice was crisp, expectant. Hi Diane, it's KH Low, I said, injecting a brightness into my voice that I certainly didn't feel. Jackson is here too. Oh, she said, her tone cooling instantly. Hello, KH Low, I assume you received my text. I did, I said, and I have to say thank you. Thank you for being so honest with us. Silence on the other end. She had expected resistance. She had expected me to be defensive. My agreement threw her off balance. Well, she hesitated. We just want what's best for Anna. She called us in tears, KH Low. It breaks a mother's heart. She says the crying is relentless. I know, I sighed, looking over at Jackson, who was chewing his lip. It's terrible that she's suffering. And you mentioned she's failing her quizzes? That is unacceptable. We can't let her jeopardize her future just because our household is in a chaotic stage. Exactly, Diane said, her voice regaining its confident stride. I'm glad you see reason. Caleb and I looked up a few daycare centers near you. There's one called Little Angels that has an opening. That won't be necessary, I cut in, my voice smooth as silk. Oh, you found one yourself? No, Diane, I said. I thought about your logic. You said the environment here is not conducive to Anna's success. You are absolutely right. A house with a newborn is no place for a serious student who needs absolute silence. So, Jackson and I have decided to help Anna by releasing her from this environment. Releasing her? Diane asked, the confusion evident. What do you mean? We're asking her to move out, I said. Effective immediately. Well, we'll give her 30 days, legally speaking, but for her academic sake, she should probably go this weekend. She needs a quiet dorm or an apartment where she can control the noise levels. We care too much about her grades to let her stay in a house that is causing her to fail. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with shock. I could hear Caleb muttering something in the background. You're kicking her out? Diane finally sputtered. Her voice rose an octave. KH Low, that is not what we discussed. We said the baby should go to daycare. But that doesn't solve the problem, Diane, I said, keeping my tone maddeningly reasonable. The baby cries at night. The baby cries on weekends. Daycare is only from 9 to 5. Anna needs sleep, right? She needs a sanctuary. If I send Lily to daycare, Anna still has to deal with evenings and mornings. No, if the house is the problem, Anna must leave the house. It's the only logical solution to ensure she gets that 4 GPA you want for her. This is ridiculous, Diane snapped, the pretense of politeness vanishing. You are twisting my words. You cannot kick her out. She is family. She has nowhere to go. She has parents, I said sharply, dropping the nice act just a fraction. Parents who live 30 minutes away, or she can live on campus. You pay her tuition, surely you can help with a dorm if her education is this critical. We can't afford a dorm right now, Caleb shouted from the background. That's why she's with you. And we were happy to help, I countered, my voice hardening. Until her presence started coming with demands that I remove my own child from her home. You can't have it both ways, Caleb. You can't ask for free rent and demand I pay $2,000 a month for daycare to facilitate that free rent. That is not how the world works. Jackson, Diane yelled. Are you listening to this? Your wife is evicting your sister. I looked at Jackson. This was the moment. He looked at the phone, then at me. He saw the fire in my eyes. He saw the logic I had laid out. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't crumble. Mom, Jackson said, his voice shaking slightly but holding firm. KH Low is right. If Anna is failing because of the baby, she can't live here. We aren't sending Lily away. That was a crazy thing to ask, Mom. Crazy? Diane shrieked. We are trying to help her sleep. KH Low is being selfish. She's home all day anyway. Why can't she just keep the baby quiet? She's a newborn, Diane, I interjected, my voice ice cold. She doesn't have a volume knob. Look, the decision is made. I'll type up the notice tonight. We love Anna, which is why we want her to be in a place where she can succeed. This house isn't it. If you do this, Diane threatened, her voice dropping to a low hiss, if you throw her out on the street, don't expect us to come to Lily's christening. Don't expect us for Christmas. If you think I'm going to let you blackmail me into choosing between my daughter and your entitled daughter, I said, then maybe it's best if you don't come. I ended the call. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The room was silent. Jackson was staring at the phone, his face pale. They're going to go nuclear, he whispered. Let them, I said, standing up. They just threatened to abandon their grandchild because we won't prioritize their adult daughter's nap schedule. They showed us who they are, Jackson. Believe them. But the war wasn't over. It was just beginning. Because while I had won the argument with the parents, I still had to deal with the girl upstairs. And I knew, with a sinking feeling, that Anna wasn't going to go quietly. She was going to make the next 30 days a living hell. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house was toxic. Anna didn't come out of her room until 11:30 a.m. When she finally emerged, she looked like a thundercloud. She marched into the kitchen where I was feeding Lily, wearing her pajamas, her eyes puffy. She didn't say hello. She went straight to the fridge, grabbed a carton of orange juice, and drank directly from the carton, staring at me the entire time. It was a petty, calculated act of dominance. Mom told me what you did, she spat, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. You're a bitch. I didn't flinch. I carefully burped Lily, keeping my movements slow and deliberate. I'm a mother, Anna, and in this house that ranks higher than sister. You have 30 days. I suggest you start packing. I'm not going anywhere, she sneered. Jackson won't let you kick me out. He's my brother. Jackson is my husband, I replied calmly. And he agrees. You're failing your classes, Anna. We're doing this for you. I'm not failing, she shouted, the lie coming out too quickly, too defensively. I got a few bad grades on quizzes because she won't shut up. She pointed a finger at Lily. Don't point at her, I warned, my voice dropping. And if you're not failing, then there shouldn't be a problem finding another place, right? Since you're such a stellar student. She stormed out, slamming the kitchen door so hard the frame rattled. Lily startled and began to cry. I shushed her, feeling my blood pressure spike. The next 3 days were a siege. Anna turned the volume on her TV up to the maximum level allowed. She and Vi. Ted friends over at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday, loud, giggling girls who stomped up the stairs and slammed doors. When I asked them to leave, Anna rolled her eyes and said, "See, she's a prison warden." Jackson was fraying at the edges. His parents were texting him nonstop, guilt trips, threats, biblical verses about family loyalty. He was sleeping on the couch because he couldn't deal with the tension in the bedroom. I felt him slipping. He was close to breaking, close to asking me to just let her stay to stop the insanity. I needed the kill shot. I needed proof that this wasn't about the baby. I needed to prove she was a liar so irrefutable that even Jackson couldn't look away. It happened on Thursday, garbage day. I was taking out the recycling bin from the garage. Anna had filled it with pizza boxes and soda cans, ignoring the rule to break down the boxes. As I was crushing a particularly greasy box from Pizza Palace, something fell out from between the cardboard flaps. It wasn't a pizza coupon, it was an envelope. It was crumpled, stained with grease, and had been ripped open hastily. The return address was the university office of the registrar. I picked it up, my heart hammering. I knew I shouldn't read her mail, technically, but it was in the trash, it was discarded, it was fair game. I pulled out the letter. It was dated 3 weeks ago. Dear Ms. Miller, this letter is to inform you that due to your continued failure to meet the minimum GPA requirements of 2, you are being placed on academic probation level 2. Our records indicate that you have failed to attend 60% of your scheduled classes for the fall semester. I scanned the dates. The fall semester, that was before Lily was born. I kept reading. Furthermore, your status as a full-time student is in jeopardy. If you do not meet the requirements by the end of this current term, you will be academically dismissed. I felt a vindictive thrill shoot through me. This was it. She wasn't failing because Lily was crying. She had been failing for months. She had been skipping classes long before she moved into my house. The baby is too loud narrative was a complete fabrication, a smokescreen she had invented to cover her own laziness. She knew her parents would blame me rather than her. She had used my daughter as a shield for her own incompetence. I smoothed out the greasy letter. I walked back into the house. Jackson was in the kitchen, staring at his phone, looking miserable. He looked up as I entered. "K.H. Lowe," he started, his voice pleading. "Mom just called again. She's crying. She says we're destroying the family. Can't we give Anna one more semester? Maybe we get a sound machine. I can't take this anymore." I didn't say a word. I simply walked over to the counter and slapped the grease-stained letter down in front of him. "Read it," I commanded. "What is this?" "Read the dates." Jackson picked up the letter. I watched his eyes scan the text. I saw the moment the realization hit him. His jaw tightened. His eyes widened. He reread the line about failure to attend 60% of classes. She wasn't even going," he whispered. This was from before Lily was born. "She lied, Jackson," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "She lied to you. She lied to your parents. And she tried to get us to send our daughter away to cover up the fact that she's been cutting class to party for 6 months. She blamed an infant for her own failure." Jackson looked up at me. The weakness was gone from his face. The conflict was gone. In its place was the same fury I had felt 3 days ago. He crumbled the letter in his fist. "Where is she?" he asked. His voice was dangerously quiet. "Upstairs," I said, "sleeping." Jackson didn't walk to the stairs. He marched. "Jackson, wait," I said, grabbing his arm. "Don't just yell at her. We end this today, but we do it publicly. We do it so Diane and Caleb can't spin it." "How?" he asked. "Sunday dinner," I said. "Your parents are coming over to mediate the situation, right? They think they're coming to bully us into submission." I took the crumpled letter from his hand and smoothed it out on the counter. "Let's welcome them," I smiled, a shark-like baring of teeth. "I think it's time for a show and tell." The air in the dining room was so thick with tension it felt like walking through water. I had spent the morning preparing a pot roast, not because I wanted to feed them, but because I wanted the setting to be perfect. I wanted the illusion of a traditional family Sunday, the smell of rosemary and roasting meat, the polished silverware, the neatly folded napkins, to stand in stark contrast to the brutality of what was about to happen. Diane and Caleb arrived at 5:00 p.m. sharp. They walked in with the swagger of generals arriving to accept a surrender. Diane didn't even look at me. She breezed past me in the foyer, heading straight for the living room where Anna was lounging on the sofa, scrolling on her phone. "Oh, my poor baby," Diane cooed, rushing over to hug Anna as if she were a refugee returning from a war zone rather than a teenager who had just eaten a bowl of my cereal. "You look so tired. Are those bags under your eyes?" Anna, sensing her audience, immediately slumped her shoulders and put on a tragic expression. "I barely slept, Mom. Lily was screaming at like 6 a.m. I stood in the doorway, watching this performance. Lily had slept until 7:30 a.m. today. I said nothing. I just smoothed my apron and caught Jackson's eye. He was standing by the stairs, his face like stone. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. "Hold the line." We moved to the dining room. The clinking of forks against china was the only sound for the first 10 minutes. I focused on cutting my meat, dissecting it with surgical precision. I waited. I knew Diane couldn't help herself. She had come here to lecture, and the silence was starving her. Finally, she put her fork down. "So," she began, her voice dripping with that sickeningly sweet condescension she had mastered over 30 years. "Have you two come to your senses about this eviction nonsense?" I took a sip of water, allowing the silence to stretch. "We're still discussing the logistics, Diane." There is nothing to discuss, Caleb grunted, pointing his knife at me. You don't kick family out, especially not a girl trying to better herself. We are all making sacrifices here. We are paying for her tuition. The least you can do is provide a roof. We did provide a roof, Jackson said quietly, not looking up from his plate. For 6 months. And now that it gets a little difficult with the baby, you want to throw her away? Diane interrupted, her eyes flashing. KH Low, I expected this selfishness from. Well, I expected you to be overwhelmed. But Jackson, I raised you better. You don't prioritize your comfort over your sister's future. Her future is at stake, Anna chimed in, her voice small and pathetic. I have midterms coming up. If I have to move now, I'll fail everything. Do you want me to fail? I looked at Anna. She was wearing a cashmere sweater Diane had bought her hair perfectly styled. She looked the picture of innocence. We certainly don't want you to fail, I said softly. That's actually why we're so concerned. Diane mentioned you were failing quizzes because of the noise. Yes, Diane slammed her hand on the table, making the water glasses jump. She is failing because she cannot concentrate, because there is a screaming infant in the house, and instead of fixing the noise, by putting the child in professional care, you are punishing the victim. So, just to be clear, I said, leaning forward, locking eyes with my mother-in-law. You believe the only reason Anna is struggling academically is because of Lily. That is the sole cause. It is the only cause, Diane declared. Anna has always been a straight-A student. She is brilliant. This environment is destroying her potential. I see, I said. I reached under the table, where I had taped the grease-stained envelope. I pulled it loose. The sound of the tape peeling was loud in the quiet room. I placed the crumpled, stained envelope in the center of the table, right next to the gravy boat. Then can you explain this? I asked. Anna froze. Her eyes darted to the envelope, and I saw the color drain from her face instantly. She recognized it. She recognized the Pizza Palace grease stain. What is that? Caleb asked, squinting. That, I said, is a letter from the university registrar. I found it in the recycling bin. Jackson, would you like to do the honors? Jackson reached out. Anna lunged forward. No, that's my private mail. You can't. Sit down, Anna, Jackson barked. His voice was so loud, so commanding, that Caleb actually jumped. Anna shrank back into her chair. Jackson opened the letter. He didn't read it silently. He read it aloud, his voice steady and projecting, like a judge reading a verdict. Dear Ms. Miller, this letter is to inform you that due to your continued failure to meet the minimum GPA requirements, you are being placed on academic probation level 2, failure to attend 60% of your scheduled classes for the fall semester. Diane was staring at Jackson, her mouth slightly open. What that? That must be a mistake. The fall semester. The fall semester, I repeated, my voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. That was September through December, Diane. Lily was born in January. Anna was failing and skipping classes for 4 months before Lily even arrived. I turned to Anna. She was looking down at her lap, picking at a loose thread on the tablecloth. You lied, I said. It wasn't a question. You stopped going to class. You spent your days shopping and your nights partying. And when the warning letter came, instead of owning up to it, you panicked. You needed an excuse. And you found the perfect ska. Pegoat, a 2-month-old baby who couldn't defend herself. The professor is unfair. Anna stammered, tears springing to her eyes, real tears this time, tears of panic. He hates me, and the dorms were loud before I moved here. It's not my fault. You blamed my daughter, Jackson said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. You tried to get us to send our newborn away. You let Mom and Dad scream at KH Low. You let them call her a bad mother. All to cover up the fact that you were too lazy to go to class. Diane snatched the letter from Jackson's hand. She read it frantically, her eyes darting back and forth, desperate to find a loophole, a misunderstanding. But the dates were in black and white. Anna, Diane whispered, looking at her daughter. Is this true? You haven't been going to class. I was tired, Anna wailed. It's hard, you put so much pressure on me. So you lied to us? Caleb asked, his face turning a deep shade of red. We paid $6,000 this semester, and you're not going. She's not just not going, I added, delivering the final blow. She's blaming us. She's destroying our peace to hide her failure. And you, Diane, you believed her so blindly that you were willing to kick your own granddaughter out of her home. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't tense anymore, it was heavy with shame. Diane looked at me, then at the baby monitor on the sideboard, then at Jackson. For the first time in 10 years, she looked small. Diane started, but she had no words. The eviction stands, I said, standing up and placing my napkin on the table. But the timeline has changed. 30 days is for tenants. Liars leave tonight. Tonight, Caleb sputtered, but where will she go? I smiled, a cold, sharp expression that I knew would haunt them. She has parents, doesn't she? Parents who are very concerned about her education. I'm sure your house is quiet enough for her to study. The hour that followed was a flurry of chaotic activity that I watched from the sanctuary of the kitchen island, sipping a fresh cup of tea. There was no more arguing. The undeniable proof of the letter had sucked the oxygen out of their righteous indignation. Diane, to her credit, or perhaps out of sheer embarrassment, didn't try to defend Anna anymore. She went upstairs with a grim determination and started throwing Anna's clothes into trash bags. I could hear Anna crying upstairs, a high-pitched, whining sound that usually made Jackson crumble. But tonight, Jackson was sitting next to me on a bar stool, scrolling through his phone, deleting Anna from our Netflix account. "Are you okay?" I asked him quietly. He looked at me, his eyes tired but clear. "I'm sorry, K.H. Lowe, I should have checked. I shouldn't have let it get this far." "You trusted your family," I said, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "That's not a crime, but now we know." "Yeah," he muttered, glancing at the ceiling as a loud thump signaled a suitcase being dragged across the floor. "Now we know." Caleb was making trips back and forth to their SUV, his face a mask of fury. He wasn't angry at us anymore. He was doing the math on the tuition money he had wasted. I heard him muttering about responsibility and getting a job as he hauled a bag of shoes past the kitchen. It took them 45 minutes to clear out the essentials. Anna came down the stairs last, carrying her makeup case, her face blotchy and red. She stopped at the kitchen doorway. She looked at Jackson, waiting for him to save her. To say, "Wait, this is too harsh, stay for the night." Jackson didn't even look up. He kept his eyes on his phone. "Make sure you leave the house key on the table, Anna." She let out a scoff of disbelief, slammed the key onto the granite counter, and stormed out. We will talk later," Diane said stiffly, pausing at the door. She looked like she wanted to apologize, but her pride was a physical barrier she couldn't cross. She couldn't bring herself to say I was wrong. Instead, she just nodded once and followed her daughter out into the night. When the front door closed, the sound echoed through the house. Then, silence. But this time, it wasn't the fragile, terrified silence of a house held hostage. It was the deep, resonant silence of peace. I walked over to the door and locked the deadbolt. The click of the metal sliding into place felt like the closing of a heavy book. I went back to the living room and sat on the sofa, my sofa. There were no textbooks scattered on the floor. There was no smoothie cup sweating on the coaster. Jackson came in and sat down next to me. He put his arm around my shoulders and pulled me close. "It's quiet," he whispered. "It's perfect," I replied. From the baby monitor, a small sound emerged, a soft coo, followed by the rustle of sheets. Lily was waking up for her evening feed. Usually, this sound would trigger a spike of anxiety. Is she going to wake Anna? Is Diane going to text me? But tonight, the sound was just my daughter. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in months. "I'll go get her," I said. "No," Jackson said, standing up. "I'll get her. You sit. You relax. Watch a show on the TV at full volume if you want." I smiled as he walked up the stairs. In the end, Anna didn't learn much. We heard later that she dropped out of college entirely and was working part-time at a boutique, living in Diane's basement. The perfect study environment at her parents' house apparently wasn't enough to cure a lack of ambition. Diane and Caleb were distant for a while, nursing their wounded pride. But slowly, inevitably, they came crawling back. They wanted to see Lily. We allowed it, but the dynamic had shifted permanently. They were guests now. They called before they came over. They didn't offer advice. They knew that I had the capacity to bite back, and that terrified them into respect. I sat back on the couch, listening to my husband cooing to our daughter upstairs. I closed my eyes and breathed in the air of my own home. It smelled like lavender and victory.